Just a nurse. That's what they saw when Danielle Ross moved through the corridors of Sacred Heart in Portland, faded scrubs hanging loose on a frame that seemed built for something heavier than bedpan rounds. 3 years of night shifts. 3 years of keeping her head down, her past buried, her hand steady while everything else fell apart. She was invisible, which was exactly how she wanted it. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song above the ICU, harsh and relentless, turning every face the color of old hospital walls. Danielle checked her watch, 11:53 p.m., and moved through her rounds with the precision of someone who'd learned that mistakes kill people. She'd learned that lesson a long time ago. Under different circumstances. In a place where the sand got into everything and the heat made the air taste like copper and diesel exhaust. Her left leg dragged slightly as she walked, a half-inch limp that never quite went away. The orthopedic surgeon had said it would improve with time. Time hadn't cooperated. She'd learned to move around it, to compensate without drawing attention, to let people see exactly what they expected, a competent floor nurse with a minor mobility issue, nothing remarkable, nothing worth asking questions about. The medication cart squeaked under her hands as she restocked it, syringes arranged in perfect rows, each label aligned at 90 degrees. Her fingers moved on their own, habit led on top of habit. Organize. Verify. Document. Document everything. In the break room, 2 nurses were laughing about something, voices bright and easy. The moment Danielle pushed through the door, the laughter paused. Conversations didn't stop, that would be too obvious, but they shifted. Someone asked about someone else's shift. Conversations became navigable channels that didn't include her. She poured coffee into a chipped mug, nodded at nobody in particular, and left. She didn't need them to understand. Understanding would have meant questions. The ICU was quiet at midnight, the way it always was before the real trouble started. Most night shifts followed the same rhythm. The first hours were stable, monitored, predictable. The crashes usually came between 2 and 4 a.m., when circadian rhythms bottomed out and bodies decided to fail. Danielle had learned to read the rhythm of machines the way some people read weather patterns, the subtle shifts in tone that meant something was about to change. Bed 7 was empty when she passed it at 11:52 p.m. By midnight, orderlies were wheeling in a new admission, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times before. Danielle saw him before the chart reached her hands. The patient was tall, shoulders built like someone who'd spent his adult life carrying weight, literal and otherwise. His left arm had a surgical scar running from shoulder to elbow, precise and old. His chest bore the kind of tan lines that came from body armor worn in a climate where the sun tried to kill you. His hands were calloused in specific places, webbing between thumb and forefinger, knuckles that had absorbed impact, palms scarred with the kind of marks that only came from rope work and weapon handling. But it was the dog tag that made her breath catch. He was clutching it in his right fist, a single piece of metal on a chain so broken it hung at an angle, the links fractured and twisted. His jaw was locked shut, his eyes staring at something beyond the ceiling, pupils dilated, and no sound had come from his mouth since the paramedics wheeled him in. The chart said nonverbal, which was clinical terminology for a man who'd seen something his voice couldn't describe anymore. Danielle approached the bed to check his vitals, and that's when he moved. Not much, with just his eyes, tracking to her face, holding there with an intensity that made the fluorescent light seem dimmer. His right hand opened slightly, the dog tag sliding, catching the light. She saw the engraving before he even showed it to her. Angel 6. Her old call sign. The one she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 4 years and 7 months. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't change. She checked his blood pressure, elevated, which made sense, and his oxygen saturation, and the line of his 4, and every other clinical metric that hospital protocol required. The whole time, his eyes stayed on hers. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began tapping the dog tag against the metal bedrail. 3 short taps. 3 long taps. 3 short taps. SOS. Then, 2 short, 2 long, 2 short. 5 long taps. 1 short, 5 long, 1 short. His call sign. Reese. Sergeant Reese from the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company. Her son Danny's commanding officer from his current deployment in Helmand Province. The man who'd led Danny's squad through the Sanjin Valley 6 months ago when they walked into an ambush that should have killed them all. Danny had come home with a Bronze Star and nightmares. This man had come home unable to speak. Danielle finished checking the monitor and wrote down the vitals in her careful, anonymous handwriting. She didn't make eye contact again. She couldn't afford to. Not yet. Somewhere in the hospital, someone was watching. Someone was always watching. She was halfway to the supply room when she heard Dr. Ashford's voice, sharp and deliberate, coming from the medication storage area down the hall. His door was cracked open. She could hear him clearly, could hear the phone pressed to his ear, could hear the satisfaction in his tone. The shipment arrives Thursday, same as always. Bed 7. Danielle froze. Her hand was on the supply room door, but she didn't pull it open. Didn't move. The hallway lights buzzed above her like insects trapped in amber. I told you, Bed 7 is completely isolated now. New admission, non-verbal, no family in state, no visitors on the chart. Nobody checks on him. Nobody asks questions. A pause. His voice dropped lower. By Friday, he'll be another number in the death report. They happen. ICU patients crash all the time. The phone conversation shifted, became muffled. She heard fragments. Regular rotation, everything's clean, nobody suspects. And compensation deposits Tuesday like clockwork. Danielle's fingers were still on the door handle, her breathing controlled, her mind doing something it hadn't done in 3 years, connecting pieces that didn't belong together. She slipped into the supply room and closed the door behind her with the softest possible click. The supply room was narrow and fluorescent lit, shelves stacked with medication, gauze, syringes, the small-scale infrastructure that kept people alive. Danielle stood there for exactly 17 seconds, letting her body remember how to operate in crisis mode. Shoulders relaxed. Breathing steady. Thoughts accelerating into clear, compartmentalized sections. Sergeant Reese was in Bed 7. He was non-verbal, which meant vulnerable. Dr. Ashford was discussing a shipment on Thursday. Bed 7. Isolation. Death report. ICU patients crash all the time. She'd seen enough compromised medical systems to recognize one when it was right in front of her. The real question was whether Reese had ended up here by accident or whether someone had put him here on purpose. Either way, he'd recognized her. And he was in danger. Danielle restocked the medication cart with the same precision she always did, moving through the motions of her invisible life, the life she'd constructed 3 years ago when she'd become just a nurse in faded scrubs with a limp. But her mind was in Helmand Province, in the command post at Forward Operating Base Shank where she'd made tactical decisions that kept her unit alive. Reese had been in her command structure before his reassignment. He'd been one of hers. She walked back past Bed 7 without looking at him. The dog tag caught the light one more time as she passed, and in that half-second, she felt something shift inside her chest, something she'd spent for years trying to bury. Her war had followed her home. And it had just checked into Bed 7. The supply room door swung open at 11:53 p.m., and Danielle reached for the O2 tubing on the 3rd shelf, her movements efficient as always. She'd been invisible at Sacred Heart long enough to know how the night shift breathed, when to move, when to stop, when to become part of the walls. That skill had kept her alive in Helmand Province. It kept her employed here. That's when she heard Dr. Ashford's voice drift through the crack in the adjacent storage closet. Low. Purposeful. A voice like a tank idling in a garage, waiting to move. Chen's already in, he said into his phone. I told her the patient is non-compliant, high liability. She bought it. A pause. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical rhythm above. Martinez is next. I have a conversation lined up for tomorrow morning. Patel too. Once word spreads that Bed 7 is a dumpster fire, the rest will fall in line. Another pause. Longer this time. The shipment arrives Thursday, same as always, Bed 7. By then, this problem will have resolved itself. Nature takes its course. Danielle's hand froze on the tubing. She'd heard those exact words once before, in a TOC in Kandahar, 18 years ago, when command had decided a village elder was more trouble than he was worth. Nature takes its course meant a decision had been made. It meant someone was going to die, and everyone involved had agreed to look away. She turned the corner slowly, her scrub shoes silent on the linoleum. Ashford stood 3 feet away, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand adjusting his designer cufflinks like a man organizing his thoughts. He saw her immediately. His smile came first, thin as a scalpel blade, and then his voice dropped into something worse than anger. Something practiced. "Nightingale," he said, ending the call with a thumb and slipping the phone into his coat pocket. "I didn't realize eavesdropping was part of your nursing education." "Oh wait, where did you get your degree again?" "Some online program." The words landed exactly where he'd aimed them. She felt the sting spread across her chest like a contaminant in blood. Online program. As if her credentials were bought from a website, as if 3 years of night shifts and patient advocacy and sleeping 4 hours a week meant nothing because she hadn't graduated from some prestigious private institution. As if. One measured breath. A single tear escaped her left eye. She didn't blink. She didn't look away. She wiped it without breaking eye contact, the gesture precise as a tactical movement. "I got my degree at the same place you got your ethics, doctor," she said, her voice steady as a pulse. "Apparently we both came up short." His jaw tightened. His fingers curled. For a moment, just a moment, he looked like a man who'd been hit in a place he didn't know was vulnerable. Then the professional mask slid back into place, and he turned away without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway with the rhythm of someone who'd already forgotten she was there. But she hadn't forgotten. Not a word. Not the tone. Not what Thursday meant. Over the next 7 days, the machinery of his plan moved into gear with the precision of someone who'd been running this operation long before Reese arrived with her son's old call sign around his neck. Dr. Chen refused the case on Tuesday morning. Danielle heard it from the ICU coordinator, who'd overheard Ashford leaving Chen's office, heard the words non-compliant patient, potential suicide risk, your license isn't worth this. Chen had signed the refusal form by 9:15 a.m. Dr. Martinez was next. Then Patel. Then Gomez. Then Williams. 5 conversations. 5 refusals. Each doctor had received the same briefing, the same gentle warning, the same implication that Bed 7 was a career accelerant waiting for a spark. By Wednesday, it was understood throughout the unit that patient was radioactive. What they didn't know was that Danielle was keeping count. On Thursday morning, she arrived for her shift to find her name posted on the public unit board beneath a heading in red marker, disciplinary action, improper chart access, D. Ross. The notation listed 17 instances. 17 times she'd accessed Reese's chart in 72 hours. Each one documented, dated, timed with the precision of someone building a file. Staff members slowed as they passed. Their eyes flicked to the board, then away. They didn't make eye contact. Maria, who'd split a sandwich with Danielle last month, suddenly found her shoes very interesting and walked faster. A nurse named Kevin actually changed direction to avoid walking past the bulletin board where Danielle was already standing, already reading the words that announced to everyone in earshot that she was the type of person who couldn't be trusted with patient information. The sting came and went. She'd survived worse. She'd survived ambushes in terrain where the sky opened up and tried to kill you. She'd survived watching soldiers under her command bleed out in her hands. A public shaming on a unit board was a scratch, nothing more. That's what she told herself. By 2:15 p.m. that same day, Ashford made his move in Reese's room. He arrived with his tablet and his tailored coat, and he did it in front of Reese's visiting sister, a woman named Catherine who'd driven 4 hours from Seattle to sit with her brother, her hands trembling as she held his hand, her eyes red from crying, her presence a witness to everything that was about to happen. "Nurse Ross," Ashford said, loud enough to carry down the hallway, "can you explain why you've accessed this patient's chart 17 times? Are you qualified to interpret these labs, or should someone with actual medical training handle this case?" The room went silent. Catherine's hand tightened on Reese's. Reese's eyes opened, tracking toward Ashford with the focus of a predator locked on prey. Danielle's hands trembled once. Just once. Then they stilled, muscles locking down the way they did when a radio crackled with incoming fire and thinking took a back seat to responding. "I'm qualified to recognize when a patient is being neglected, doctor." Ashford's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into the edge of his tablet. Catherine stared, her expression shifting from confusion to something darker, something closer to understanding. He turned and left without another word, his shoes striking the linoleum in a rhythm that suggested he was walking very carefully to keep from running. That was the second time she'd seen him genuinely angry. She knew what that meant. It meant his timeline was accelerating. It meant he'd expected her to break, to cry, to apologize, to accept the shame and sink into the background where she belonged. She hadn't. So he would have to adjust. The rotating shifts began that weekend. Nights Monday, then days Tuesday, then evenings Wednesday. Her schedule fractured like bad concrete, designed to exhaust the body and disorient the mind. She arrived for Tuesday day shift with 4 hours of sleep, her circadian rhythm screaming in protest, and that's when she tried to badge into the ICU and the door wouldn't open. Her card, which had worked for 3 years, suddenly had restricted access. She stood at the badge reader, watching the little red light refuse her. Once. Twice. The security guard appeared before she could try a third time, a man named Burton who'd always nodded at her in the cafeteria, now approaching with the apologetic distance of someone delivering bad news. "Danielle, I'm going to need you to wait right here. I've got a call into HR to verify your credentials. Shouldn't be more than 20 minutes. 23 minutes later, she was allowed through. No explanation. The guard didn't meet her eyes. The implication was clear, her access was conditional now, provisional, something that could be revoked again at any moment. By Thursday evening, she'd given up on the break room. She'd learned that lesson the first time she sat down with her lunch and watched 3 nurses grab their coffee and leave in synchronized waves, Maria lingering just long enough to make the choice personal, just long enough for Danielle to understand that association with her had become a liability. The coffee maker hissed its steam. A door swung open somewhere down the hallway. She ate her sandwich alone, the fluorescent buzz filling the silence like white noise, like the sound of a hospital that didn't know what to do with ghosts. And then Friday morning came with a new announcement from Ashford at the nursing station, delivered loud enough for everyone within 20 feet to hear. "A Nurse Ross, we're making some schedule adjustments. Effective Monday, you'll be supporting the satellite clinic rotation at our Beaverton location. It's going to be a great opportunity to expand your skill set. A change of scenery. A transfer. Across town. Away from bed 7. Away from Reese. Away from whatever was happening on Thursday that Ashford had promised would resolve itself." She didn't flinch. She didn't push back. She simply nodded and said, "Understood, doctor," the same way she'd said it 1,000 times before to 1,000 different orders, the same way she'd learned to say it when obedience meant survival. But that night, alone in the stairwell with the door closed, she took one measured breath and let a single tear escape without making a sound, wiped it without breaking the rhythm of her breathing, and something in her chest shifted from grief into something harder. Something colder. Something that had a name she hadn't used in 18 years. It had a name, and the name was Major. And then, on Tuesday evening, Reese's vitals began to drop. Tuesday evening came with the precision of a hospital clock, 1956 hours, and Danielle was already in scrubs when she swiped her badge at the unit entrance. The reader beeped red. Not green. Red. She swiped again. Red again. The magnetic lock didn't click. She stood in the threshold between the world she'd left and the world she'd chosen, card in hand, and understood without needing confirmation that Ashford had already moved. Not a transfer across town. A complete erasure from the unit. Her access revoked. Her clearance stripped. The precision of it was almost military, which meant it was completely his style. Danielle turned and walked to the administrative office. 15 seconds later, the head nurse, Rebecca, who'd always been neutral ground, never friendly but never hostile, wouldn't meet her eyes. Dr. Ashford's orders came down at 17:30. Security badge access restricted pending ethics review. You can still work the unit, but... Rebecca let the sentence die like a patient with no hope of resuscitation. You understand. Danielle understood perfectly. She was a ghost now. Present but untouchable. She nodded once, turned, and moved toward the stairs. Her jaw clenched, just once, just enough, and then her face was smooth again. The mask didn't slip. The mask had learned to hold. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part arrived at 20:15 when Danielle, stationed in the break room with a coffee she wouldn't drink, heard the charge nurse page for Dr. Ashford. Code blue message, ICU bed 7. Her patient. Her room. Her Reese. She moved without thinking, muscle memory, the kind that lived in her bones from 18 years of being useful in crisis. Down the corridor. Through the glass doors. The monitor was screaming its electronic panic, and Reese's chest barely rose beneath the thin hospital gown, his oxygen sat already falling, 88. 86, 84. The numbers dropping like a countdown with no destination but flat line. Danielle hit the code button herself. 2 residents arrived within 90 seconds, and they were competent, good chest compressions, two-handed bagging on the manual ventilator, the kind of mechanical rhythm that bought time while real help arrived. But Reese didn't need CPR. Reese needed surgery. His abdomen was rigid as a shipyard hull beneath her palm, distended, dark. Internal bleeding. The kind of bleed that didn't announce itself with screaming or visible wounds. The kind that whispered itself into organs until there was nothing left but a shell. Dr. Chen arrived at 20:34, chart in hand, and Danielle watched his face shift, the recognition, the understanding of what this patient needed. He looked at Reese. He looked at Danielle. He looked away. Dr. Ashford says conservative management, Chen said, and those 6 words fell into the room like stones into a well. I'm not comfortable overriding the attending. He didn't stay for a response. He didn't need to. He left, and the door whispered shut behind him. Danielle paged Dr. Martinez next. Martinez arrived, examined Reese with practiced hands, and Danielle saw it in his shoulders, the recognition that this was surgical. That this was emergency. That this was the moment where a surgeon earned their title or betrayed it. Martinez picked up the wall phone and stepped into the hallway. Danielle couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read the body language, the straightening spine, the nod, the slow exhale. When he came back, his voice was quiet as a funeral dirge. I can't help you. Dr. Patel didn't even come to the floor. His response to the page came through the charge nurse like an echo, Ashford's patient, Ashford's call. The words were medical equivalent of a closed coffin. Dr. Gomez was next, a decent surgeon, someone Danielle had seen work with focus and precision. He examined Reese, and for 3 full seconds, Danielle thought the campaign might end here. Thought someone might choose medicine over politics. Thought someone might remember their oath. Then Gomez's pager chirped. He looked at it. His face went white. He excused himself, and through the glass partition, Danielle watched him take the phone call. Watched his expression harden into something that looked like fear. When he returned, he said, I've been called to surgery. Emergency consult across the city. I'm sorry, and he was already moving, already gone, the lie sitting between them like a body. That left Dr. Williams, trauma surgeon, former military, the kind of woman who usually understood sacrifice and duty better than the civilian doctors. Danielle found her in the medication room restocking at 21:08, and she explained the situation in fragments. Reese, bed 7, ICU, abdominal rigidity, dropping SATS, no surgeon willing to respond, 5 doctors have refused, and Ashford is orchestrating it from above like he's conducting a funeral march. Williams listened. Williams looked like she understood. Williams looked like she wanted to help. Then her pager went off at 21:11, and Danielle watched the light drain from her eyes like someone had pulled a switch. I've been called to another hospital. Emergency transfer. Critical patient. Williams trailed off, and they both knew the truth wasn't what her mouth was saying. She'd been called by someone more important than Danielle. Ashford had reach. Ashford had allies. Ashford had already made phone calls, the kind that moved surgeons across the city and closed doors and deleted options. By 21:38, Reese's blood pressure had dropped to 60/38. His abdomen distended further. The dull percussion note of blood pooling behind peritoneal wall. The kind of clinical picture that screamed for an operating room, for a surgical team, for hands that could cut and clamp and save. Instead, Reese had silence and a nurse who'd been erased. The charge nurse called for Ashford directly. No response. Called again at 21:52. Still nothing. Danielle understood what Ashford was doing, letting the clock run. Letting the patient deteriorate past the point of salvage. Letting the bloodless execution play itself out without his fingerprints on the weapon. The brilliance of it was almost evil. Almost. 2 residents kept the mechanical ventilation going. Danielle stood at the bedside, watching numbers drop like a soldier watching a comrade's pulse fade. 54/32. 48/28. Her hand stayed steady. Her voice stayed level when she called out vitals to the team. Her composure was a glass shield between the chaos outside and the warrior inside. At 22:14, Reese's trembling hand lifted, just barely, fighting through the sedation and the bleeding and the dissolution of his body. His fingers groped for the dog tag still hanging on his chest, the one he'd clutched when he arrived, the one Danielle had noticed but never touched. He held it in his palm and began to tap it against the bed rail with what little strength remained. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. SOS. Then another pattern. For dots. 1 dash. For dots. A dash, 2 dots. Dots and dashes arranged into something older than words, older than rank, older than protocol. The military language that lived in bone and muscle. The language of Helmand Province at 0300 hours. The language of her call sign. Danielle's hand froze over the 4 pump. Reese's eyes opened, unfocused, sedated, but present, and locked onto hers. He tapped the code again. Slower this time. Making sure. Making certain she understood. He knew. Somehow, in whatever way soldiers recognize other soldiers, Sergeant Reese knew exactly who was standing at his bedside in faded scrubs. Knew her call sign. Knew her history. Knew that her name wasn't just Danielle Ross, night shift nurse. Knew that the war never really ended. It just changed uniforms. And in that moment, with his blood pressure flatlined at the edge of death, Danielle understood something with the clarity of a sniper scope. Reese wasn't dying because of medical neglect. He was dying because of her. Because 5 doctors had been told to refuse him. Because Ashford had seen the connection, had maybe always seen it, and decided to kill the patient to destroy the nurse. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. It was the difference between a composure that held and a composure that finally shattered. She squeezed Reese's hand once, a message in pressure alone, and moved toward the supply room where she kept her boots and her jacket and one other thing, the thing she'd never unpacked from 2009, the thing that had lived in a locker for 3 years and 3 months. The thing that had a weight and a purpose and a name. That was when the real nightmare began. Tuesday night at 11:47, Sergeant Reese's blood pressure began its descent into silence. Danielle saw it first on the monitor, a number dropping like a stone through water. 110/70. 105/65. 100/58. She leaned forward, reading the screen the way soldiers read maps. Internal bleeding. Ashford had known. He'd seen the initial ultrasound, the free fluid pooling in the abdomen, the dark shadow that meant blood where blood had no business being. And he'd done nothing. Written no orders. Called no surgeon. Left Reese to bleed out quietly while the machines beeped their indifferent rhythm. She pressed the code button. The intercom crackled. No response. She pressed it again, longer this time. A nurse appeared in the doorway, Maria, one of the two who'd been kind to her during the isolation campaign. His pressure's dropping fast, Danielle said, her voice level as a laser. I'll get Dr. Chen. Chen won't come. None of them will. Not anymore. Maria's face went pale. She understood what that meant. She'd been there when the 5 doctors, Chen, Martinez, Patel, Gomez, and Williams, had each turned away. She'd heard the whispers. She'd watched Ashford work the phone lines like a conductor, moving pieces across a board. Danielle moved with a kind of purpose that came from having made this exact calculation before, under mortar fire, with minutes that mattered more than breath. She locked the trauma bay door. The click echoed. What are you doing? Maria's voice climbed an octave. My job. She walked to her locker, the one in the break room where no one wanted to sit near her, and pulled the bottom drawer open. Beneath her street clothes, beneath a pair of old running shoes, she found the leather roll. She'd kept it for 18 years. Never thought she'd need it. Never thought she'd have the right to need it. Her hands unrolled the leather like a sacrament. The combat knife lay inside, pristine and sharp. She'd cleaned it the night of her medical discharge, before she'd buried it in darkness. It had tasted blood twice in Helmand Province. It had saved lives in places where the Geneva Convention was something people whispered about in the dark. James appeared in the hallway, the other nurse who'd helped her that first night with Reese's care. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looked like he'd been built for helping people who were about to die. I need you to trust me, Danielle said. Not a request. A command delivered in a voice that had ordered men into fire. What are you doing? Maria whispered. Saving his life. They moved together into the trauma bay, and the door locked behind them. Danielle prepped the field with movements that came from muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. Betadine. Sterile drape. She palpated the intercostal space, 5th rib, 5th intercostal space, between the ribs, the exact topology of human anatomy mapped onto her hands like a GPS system written in bone. Keep pressure on the abdomen, she told James. And don't look away. The knife cut with the precision of 2 decades of absence. Skin, fascia, muscle separating like water. She'd done this in a combat support hospital in Sanjin Valley while incoming fire hammered the corrugated roof. She'd done this in a forward operating base when a Marine had taken shrapnel through the thorax and the surgeon had collapsed from heat exhaustion. Her hands remembered what her mouth never spoke. The bleeding was arterial, dark and urgent. She located the source, the internal mammary artery, pulsing against her vision like a drumbeat in the chest. The bleeding was where she knew it would be. Pain was data. Blood was information. Every second was a language. She clamped. Sutured. Packed the wound with gauze that turned from white to crimson in seconds. Her hands moved like they were playing an instrument only she could hear. Muscle memory took over. The hiss of air escaping from the chest cavity. The soft pop of the clamp securing. Systolic pressure beginning to climb on the monitor. 85. 92. 104. Climbing. 27 minutes from code button to stable sinus rhythm. Reese's eyes, open now, fixed on her face with the intensity of a man who understood exactly what he'd just witnessed. When Danielle opened the trauma bay door, Dr. Ashford was standing there with 2 security officers and the chief of surgery, a tall woman named Jacobs who wore her authority like armor. Step away from the patient, Ashford said. Patient is stable, Danielle replied. Arterial bleed, upper thorax. Controlled. Vitals normalizing. You performed surgery without a medical license, Jacobs said. Her voice was steady, administrative, the sound of a system protecting itself. You performed an unsupervised procedure on a patient. That's a felony, Ms. Ross. The words felt like they were happening to someone else. Like she was watching this scene through a window. Security escorted her from the unit. By Wednesday morning, Maria and James had been reassigned, Maria to pediatrics in a different wing, James transferred to the satellite clinic across town. Ashford had moved fast, surgical and strategic. He'd called the chief of surgery at home that night. He'd framed the thoracotomy as the reckless actions of an unauthorized practitioner. He'd convened an emergency ethics review scheduled for 8 in the morning. By Wednesday noon, Danielle was fired. Jacobs handed her the termination letter in person, her expression sympathetic but resolute. Your employment at Sacred Heart is terminated effective immediately. You performed a surgical procedure without proper medical credentials. We have no choice. Ashford watched from his office doorway, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply watched her leave, the way a predator watches prey retreat into tall grass. That evening, Danielle stood in the hospital laundry room, returning her scrubs. The attendant, an older woman whose name she'd never learned, wouldn't look at her. The final indignity. To become so thoroughly erased that even the people who passed you in hallways couldn't meet your eyes. She folded each piece of scrub with the same precision she'd once used to fold a flag at a soldier's funeral. Crisp edges. Perfect corners. Military corners, the kind that took practice and purpose. The blue fabric was soft now, worn thin by hundreds of washings. She'd worn these scrubs for 3 years. They were all the armor she'd needed in a hospital that had decided she was invisible. The last pair of pants. The last shirt. Each one folded and set in a pile, ready for the next person who would wear invisibility like a uniform. When she turned to leave, a voice stopped her. You know what you did, right? It was the attendant, finally looking up from her cart of linens. I did my job, Danielle said. No, the woman said, shaking her head slowly. You did something else. Something bigger than a job. Danielle didn't respond. She turned and walked out of the laundry room, leaving her scrubs stacked on the counter like a resignation written in blue fabric. She didn't know that Thursday morning was coming. She didn't know that her son Danny was already on his way with a shadow box full of medals. She didn't know that everything she'd buried for 18 years was about to be exhumed in the bright fluorescent light of a hospital corridor. She only knew that she'd saved a man's life. That she'd used the only tools that had ever belonged to her. And that the cost of being a hero was still, apparently, being invisible. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. Thursday morning, the ICU doors burst open, and 17-year-old Danny Ross stood there breathing hard, cradling a shadow box against his chest like it held the dead. His combat boots, real ones, not costume, tracked water from the Portland rain across the linoleum. Danielle looked up from the medication cart and froze. Her son's voice cracked as it filled the unit, raw and desperate in a way she'd never heard. My mother is Major Danielle Ross, Special Forces. The words hung there like a defibrillator shock to the entire floor. The head nurse turned. Then everyone turned. Danielle's face didn't change. Her hands didn't pause. But every muscle from her shoulders down recognized the moment for what it was, the end of invisibility. Danny's voice grew stronger. She led 17 missions in Helmand Province. She was medically discharged after her leg was shattered by an IED. And she saved a life in this hospital that 5 qualified doctors refused to touch. He opened the shadow box with trembling hands, and there they were, the medals she'd buried in a locker 3 years ago, each one catching the fluorescent light like a confession. The head nurse picked up Danielle's personnel file with hands that had suddenly gone soft and uncertain. She read aloud, each word dropping like a stone into still water. Silver Star. Her voice wavered. Bronze star with Valor. Another pause, longer this time. 2 purple hearts. The nurse's eyes rose to meet Danielle's across the nurse's station, searching her face as if seeing her for the first time. Around them, the ICU continued its mechanical rhythms, ventilators wheezed, monitors beeped, but no one moved. Dr. Ashford stood frozen by the unit desk, his face the color of hospital walls. That was when the elevator doors opened and a man in his 50s stepped out, carrying the kind of presence that made subordinates instinctively stand straighter. Navy SEAL Commander insignia on his jacket. He walked directly to Danielle without ceremony, without hesitation, and spoke in a voice like concrete settling. Major Ross led my team on Operation Nightfall in Sanjan Valley. An ambush. 17 hostiles, 2 of my men down with sucking chest wounds, and no air support for 40 minutes. Your mother, he said, turning slightly to include Danny, pulled both of them out from under effective fire and carried them 3 kilometers across open terrain with a shattered leg. That's a Silver Star minimum. That's the kind of warrior you don't forget. He saluted her, not a casual gesture, but the full ceremonial weight of it. The room had gone beyond silent. The room had gone into shock. And that was before the FBI agents walked through the doors. There were 2 of them, and they moved with the efficiency of federal authority. The lead agent, a woman with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen enough institutional corruption to fill a prison, approached the chief of surgery, badge already extended. We've been investigating Dr. Ashford's operation for 9 months. Drug diversion. Insurance fraud. Conspiracy. Her partner handed a manila folder thick as a novel to the chief. What you need to understand is that Sergeant Reese wasn't catatonic. He was deep undercover. ATF. When Major Ross overheard Dr. Ashford discussing a shipment in the supply room, he recognized an active investigation was compromised. He entered the ICU to confirm the source of the leak. Major Ross became a threat because she overheard him, and Dr. Ashford knew it. The implications rippled across the room like a stone through water. Danielle's hands remained steady, but her eyes had narrowed in a way that suggested she was running calculations, connecting dots she'd already suspected. The FBI agent opened the folder. Dr. Chen received consulting fees totaling $42,000 from a shell corporation. Dr. Martinez had $260,000 in gambling debts that disappeared after a phone call from Dr. Ashford. Dr. Patel's research grant, $800,000, came from the same shell company. Dr. Gomez has compromising photographs we'd rather not detail. Dr. Williams' son's DUI arrest was expunged. She paused. All documented. All recent. All contingent on refusing care to Sergeant Reese. Ashford's voice emerged thin and cracking. I don't know what you're talking about. But his hands were shaking, and the room had already stopped believing him. The next voice came from the back of the unit. Torres, the hospital IT supervisor, a Marine Corps veteran with a faded tattoo of the eagle, globe, and anchor on his forearm, stepped forward holding a laptop. He'd been working the night shift when Ashford tried to delete the security footage. He'd been building a redundant backup system for months, unbeknownst to administration, because he'd seen too many good people buried by bad ones with access. He opened the laptop, and the footage played across the screen, Dr. Ashford's hands deleting medication orders. His voice on hospital phones making calls to the 5 doctors. His hands intercepting drug deliveries in the basement at 2 in the morning. 27 hours of video that told a story of systemic corruption. Torres turned to face Ashford directly. I recognized what you were doing, sir. I've seen men like you before. Men who use their authority like a weapon. Men who hurt people who actually served. His voice carried the particular weight of someone speaking from hard-earned knowledge. You don't get to do this. By Saturday morning, Dr. Ashford's medical license was suspended pending criminal charges. 14 federal counts: drug trafficking, insurance fraud, witness intimidation, conspiracy to obstruct justice. His arrest was processed through the same hospital security office where he'd once reviewed performance evaluations. The 5 doctors were notified of federal investigations. Chen, Martinez, and Patel submitted resignations by noon. Gomez and Williams lost all clinical privileges. The narrative collapsed from Dr. Ashford's version of events into something so utterly demolished that even his attempts at spin died before reaching the hospital grapevine. The chief of surgery personally reinstated Danielle with full back pay, a formal written apology, and, in an odd touch of genuine shame, a request that she consider a position in hospital administration. She declined, but accepted the title of Senior Trauma Nursing Supervisor. Maria and James, the two nurses who'd assisted with the thoracotomy, received formal commendations. The hospital's board issued a statement about institutional accountability that no one particularly believed but everyone appreciated was made. Sacred Heart's reputation, briefly tarnished, was carefully resewn by the narrative of one corrupt doctor discovered and neutralized by the system itself. The system, in this version, worked. 18 months later, Danielle stood in Washington, D.C., under lights that turned everything to white clarity. The National Honor of Nursing Award, given annually to 12 nurses across the entire country for demonstrated moral courage and clinical excellence. Her dress uniform was pressed razor-sharp, her medals arranged in ascending order, her posture the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades making life-or-death decisions without flinching. Danny sat in the front row beside Commander Hayes and Sergeant Reese, who had regained his voice and his bearing and was now working as a patient advocate at the VA. The citation was read aloud by the Surgeon General himself, for extraordinary courage, clinical excellence, and unwavering moral clarity in the face of institutional corruption. For honoring her oath when the institution itself betrayed that oath. Major Danielle Ross. When she returned to Portland, Sacred Heart had installed her photograph in the Hall of Honor, a wall of distinguished staff in the main lobby, backlit and framed in mahogany. She'd walked past that wall 1,000 times as an invisible night shift nurse. Now her face looked back at her with the composure of someone who'd survived both war and the poisoned institutional corridors that followed it. One evening in October, she was walking through that lobby after her shift, and she saw him. Night security guard. Blue uniform, name tag, pushing a mop past the portraits. Dr. Ashford had been released after 6 months of a federal sentence, overcrowded prisons, good behavior, connections that even disgrace couldn't entirely erase. He'd taken the only job that would hire him, janitorial work in the hospital where he'd once commanded staff meetings. His eyes met hers for exactly 1 second. Recognition flashed between them. He looked away first, dropping his gaze to the floor, to the mop, to the water that wasn't clean enough anymore. Danielle continued past him without breaking stride. Her office was on the 3rd floor. Silver Star and Bronze Star now hung on the wall beside her nursing degree, no longer hidden in lockers, no longer separated from her public identity. She'd stopped being invisible the day her son walked through those ICU doors. She'd stopped being someone with something to hide the moment she'd chosen a patient over her career. That evening, she visited Reese in his new office at the VA hospital. He made coffee, terrible coffee, the way military people always did, and they sat in comfortable silence for the first time since Helmand Province. He finally spoke. "How did you hold it together? All those months, being pushed, isolated, watching him try to destroy you." Danielle thought of the break room where staff left the moment she sat down. She thought of being written up on the public board. She thought of the laundry room, folding her scrubs one final time. She thought of every measured breath, every quiet refusal to give Ashford the satisfaction of seeing her break. She smiled slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "True class is what you do when the lights go out." Reese nodded slowly. He reached up and tapped his dog tag twice, Morse code for understood, the same code he'd tapped in the ICU when Danielle was the only one who remembered what it meant. Outside, Portland rain fell against the windows, and somewhere in the hospital below, the night shift began. The monitors beeped. The ventilators wheezed. The work of healing continued, carried forward by nurses who'd learned to recognize courage in unexpected places. And in the portraits of honor, a photograph hung that told an entirely different story than anyone had first believed. If you're enjoying this, smash that like button. And answer me this: would you have signed the NDA and taken the money, or fought back? Comments are open.